Okay, so picture this, an entire nation's fate resting not just on one person's decisions, but on their actual physical body. It sounds wild, right? Well, today we're going to explore just that, how for centuries in France, the king literally was the state. So let's start with a big question. What does power actually look like? I mean, really, what's its physical form? Now, today, that's a tough one to answer. But if we jump back to 17th century France, well, the answer to that question defined their entire world. Let's get into it. Right, so for us, power is kind of abstract, you know? It's in these anonymous institutions, these complex laws, these sprawling bureaucracies. But in Bourbon France, no way. Power was concrete, it was physical, it was literally inside the king's body. The state wasn't some idea floating around, it was a person you could see and touch. And this idea created a world that's, well, it's hard for us to imagine. Think of it like a solar system, with the king as the sun. Everything, all authority, all influence, radiated from his physical presence. You see this play out at the court of Versailles. I mean, you had aristocrats who would fight and scheme and bribe each other, all for what? For the honor of just being near him, even for something as simple as holding his candle while he got dressed in the morning. Because in that world, being close to the king, that was power, period. And don't think for a second this was just some abstract theory that people talked about. Oh no, the kings themselves believed it, like down to their bones. Louis XV said it best. He basically said, "The rights and interests of the nation are united with mine and remain uniquely in my hands." There was no separation. He and the state were one and the same. The fusion was total. Okay, but wait, this brings up a huge problem, doesn't it? If the state is the king's body, what happens when that body gets sick or, eventually dies? The kingdom is supposed to be immortal, but the king, well, he's just a man. He's human. Well, the answer they came up with is, honestly, it's pretty brilliant. It's this incredible piece of legal and theological gymnastics called the king's two bodies. And this idea, this wasn't just some footnote. It was the absolute bedrock of the monarchy. It's what gave it continuity and what backed up its claim to have a divine right to rule. So here's how it worked. First, you have the body natural. This is exactly what it sounds like. It's the king's physical, mortal body, the one made of flesh and blood that gets hungry, gets sick, and eventually dies. This is the body of Louis XIV that had to deal with gout and all sorts of digestive issues. But, and this is the key, he also had a second body, the body politic or his sacred body. Now, this one was totally different. It was immortal, it was invisible, it was the pure incarnation of the kingdom itself. And it could never, ever die. You can hear this whole idea perfectly in that famous phrase they'd shout at a king's funeral, "The king is dead, long live the king." It sounds like a contradiction, right? But it's not. The king is dead. That's the natural mortal body in the coffin. Long live the king. That's the sacred body, the state itself, living on, instantly transferred to the next guy in line. So clever. And they were constantly reinforcing this idea through all these public rituals. Think about it. At the coronation, the king's actual body gets anointed with holy oil. Poof, it's now sacred. People believed he could literally cure diseases with just his touch. And then at his funeral, they display this lifelike wax effigy of him right next to his corpse to show everyone, hey, look, the immortal king is still here, power has moved on seamlessly. So this wasn't just some dusty old legal theory, It had real-world consequences. It became this incredibly powerful, everyday tool for control, a kind of soft power that literally shaped the bodies of everyone at court. Versailles really was like this giant stage. It was a massive theater, a machine designed for one purpose, to churn out loyal subjects. And how did it do that? By controlling their bodies. Everything, how you moved, how you talked, even how you dressed, was a performance of obedience. You were literally acting out your loyalty with your own flesh and bone. I mean, just look at the courtiers. Their bodies were like walking billboards for the king's power. Those crazy wigs, the high heels for men, the stiff posture, the super precise controlled movements, all of it was a public sign that they submitted to the king's order. They were basically learning how to be obedient through their posture. And here's a great example. Louis XIV, the Sun King, took dance lessons for 25 years. He made sure he was the best dancer at court, and he only allowed this very specific, very rigid French music to be played. The message was clear, both literally and figuratively. Everyone danced to the king's tune. But a system like this, it has a huge Achilles heel. I mean, it's all built on the king's body being this perfect symbol. So what happens when that symbol, the king's actual natural body, starts to look weak or corrupt or just completely out of control? And the reign of Louis XV is the perfect case study for this collapse. It's a fascinating story. He starts out in 1744 as Louis the Well-Loved. The whole country adores him. But then, his personal life starts to get messy. His constant affairs, his indecisiveness. People started seeing those not as personal flaws, but as political ones. By the time he dies, he's totally unmourned. His body had gone from being a sacred symbol to a symbol of a corrupt, rotting regime. And this led people to ask a really devastating question, a question that struck right at the heart of the whole system. Hang on a second, they'd say. If this guy can't even govern his own body, his own desires, how on earth can he govern the body of the entire country? It's a killer point. And what's so clever is how the critics started using the monarchy's own logic against it. They started linking the king's personal bodily disorder, his lustfulness, directly to political disorder, like tyranny. The argument was simple and powerful. An out-of-control king leads to an out-of-control, unjust kingdom. This wasn't even a brand new tactic. Years earlier, during a civil war called the Fronde, critics did the same thing to the king's top minister, Cardinal Mazarin. They attacked him by attacking his body. The pamphlets described him as this grotesque monster, a leech, a serpent, a wolf, basically a whole zoo of parasitic animals feeding on the body of France. It was brutal stuff. So, where does all this lead? Well, the ultimate consequence of a failing royal body is, of course, revolution. When the central symbol of your entire political system starts to rot, the whole system is in deep, deep trouble. And that's why the execution of Louis XVI was so much more than just killing a man. It was a huge symbolic act. They were literally and figuratively chopping the head off the old body politic. It was a clean break, severing the head from the kingdom and killing an entire way of seeing the world. So, once they destroyed that old body, the revolutionaries had to create a new one, a republican body. Out went the old symbols of power that were worn on the body, the nobleman's sword, the priest's collar, those fancy knee breeches. And in came the new symbols of equality, the tricolored sash, and most famously, the simple long trousers of the working man, the sans-culottes. But here's the fascinating part. Even after all that, the revolutionaries discovered they couldn't get away from the need to give power a physical form. They came up with new symbols, like the figure of Marion to represent the nation. But that just opened up a whole new can of worms. Whose body gets to be the Republican body? Men? Women? White people? Black people? Getting rid of the king didn't solve the problem of who gets to be represented. And really, that leaves us with a final thought that's incredibly relevant today. The monarchy might be long gone, but we still use that phrase, the body politic. And that forces us to ask, how do we imagine that body today? Whose bodies are included? Whose are represented? Whose are left out? Deciding whose flesh and blood makes up the nation, that's a question with enormous consequences. And it's just as urgent now as it was back then.